Welcome to With Legal and Business Insights. I'm your host, Joe Morales, and I'm back with the second episode in our series. We've designed this podcast to provide a platform for discussion of various legal and business issues. Last time, we featured a conversation with Michael Rueda, the head of Withers Bergmann's U.S. sports practice, about the firm's sports capabilities and issues related to soccer player development in the U.S. In this episode, I'm joined by Vasiliki Yiannoulis to discuss the impact of recent U.S. tax law changes on U.S. real estate investment opportunities. Remember, you can use the links in the show notes to provide feedback on any podcast episode, and we encourage folks to let us know how we're doing. Another reminder, we're not providing any legal advice via this podcast. The information contained in this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal or other advice. You shouldn't rely on this content, and we don't accept liability to any person who relies on this content. Legal provisions change frequently, and any commentary in this program should be reconfirmed before any action is taken. This podcast material is not intended to be used and cannot be used by anyone for the purpose of avoiding federal tax penalties that may be imposed on any taxpayer. With the legal disclaimer once again out of the way, let's turn to today's guest. Vasi Yiannoulis is a real estate partner who joined Withers Bergmann in 2014, and she's been practicing in New York City for almost a decade. Vasi currently splits time between our firm's offices in New York City and Greenwich, Connecticut. Her practice primarily focuses on commercial real estate matters, and she routinely assists private and institutional clients with a variety of real estate transactions, including property acquisitions and dispositions, loan transactions, title matters, and leasing transactions. When Vasi is not practicing law, she likes to travel the world and is also a lover of sports. In fact, colleges expressed interest in recruiting her to play basketball when she was in high school, but fortunately for all you real estate investors out there, she chose to be an attorney instead. She recently co-authored an article called The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, a boon for U.S. commercial real property investment, with two other Withers attorneys, James Brockway and William Cambus. We've included a link to the article in this episode's show notes. As part of our conversation, Vasi explained a bit about the firm's real estate practice and her expertise, and then we talked about reasons why the U.S. real estate market is an attractive investment opportunity and the impact of the recent U.S. tax law changes. Okay, so I'm here with my colleague Vasi Yiannoulis, who is a partner in our New York and Greenwich offices here in the U.S. Today we're talking about investment into U.S. real estate and some major changes in the tax laws that make that an attractive proposition for foreign investors and U.S. investors alike. So Vasi, thanks for joining me today. Spending otherwise billable time with me is always appreciated.
Sure thing. I'm glad to be here, Joe.
Great. So let's kind of start with some general background for the audience. As a general matter, what makes New York City and some of the other U.S. markets like Miami attractive for real estate investment?
Well, traditionally, the U.S. has been attractive for real estate investment because it's a stable market, especially places like New York and Miami and other gateway cities like San Francisco.
Okay.
They're just a great place for investors to park money because the money is safe there, and on top of that, places like New York, it tends to grow.
Right.
And even when the market is not doing well, in places like New York, real estate tends to hold its value. So in general, it's just a good investment proposition.
Okay, so historically, these are the places where investors are parking their money. Now, I understand the TCJA. What does that stand for? I guess educate me a little bit on that, because I have it jotted down on my notes as the abbreviation.
Okay, it's the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which Donald Trump signed into law on December 22nd, 2017.
Okay.
It's made some substantial changes to the tax law for almost all types of taxpayers, but in particular, it is thought to be extremely favorable to commercial real estate investment.
Okay, and that's what I got out of the article that you had sent me to prepare for this conversation, that there are, I guess there's icing on the cake now for folks that are looking to invest in the U.S. real estate market. Could you walk us through what some of those or why that is?
Sure. So, one of the biggest changes was the 21% corporate income tax rate. Prior to that, the income tax rate was much higher. I think it was somewhere in the 30s.
Okay, right.
And so now it's a 21% rate, which is a significant change. And in fact, it was 35%. So it lowered the tax rate from 35% to 21%, which is huge.
Right.
On top of that, there's a 20% deduction for qualified, quote unquote, pass-through entities. And you guessed it, commercial real estate entities do qualify for this deduction. On top of that, the mortgage interest and SALT deductions, state and local income tax deductions are not limited for investment into commercial real estate. So while they're limited on the residential side, on the commercial side, there's no cap. So you can continue to take the deductions that you would have taken, prior to the law coming into place.
Okay, so someone like me who is searching for a private home in New York and deciding between New York and Connecticut is taking this into account as a small-time residential purchaser, but you're saying that on the commercial side, those investors are still getting the same benefits that they were getting before the law was passed.
Correct. That's exactly right.
Okay.
And so when you might think twice about, investing in a residential property, you wouldn't have that issue on the commercial side.
Right.
On top of that, the 1031 rules have been retained for real estate, where they haven't been for other assets like art.
Okay.
So,
well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So in some respects, maybe real estate isn't, someone maybe that was thinking about investing in an art collection. These get very expensive in terms of, collection values. Now maybe that investor, instead of putting their money into art here in the U.S., is thinking, let me get in the commercial real estate game instead.
Sure. I mean, again, real estate's just a safe investment generally in the U.S.,
Right.
particularly in places like New York. And now these rules they're making it even more attractive, possibly for obvious reasons, considering who our president is and what his business is. But, it's this was a really welcome change for investors in commercial real estate.
And you think it's enough to push people over the edge? Now I'm going a little bit off script, but I mean, in terms of people that were maybe on the fence about investing in the U.S. market?
Oh, sure. I mean, definitely. I mean, these tax rules are now so much more favorable that, it used to be that, some investors might hesitate because, the tax implications of investing in real estate in the U.S. were not inconsequential. And now, I mean, with these new rules, it just makes it that much more attractive. And we're starting to see some investors who have decided that the time is right now to come in and make these investments.
Right.
And, of course, the new bill is sort of encouraging people to think about what type of investment to make. So, we're seeing people who have more of an interest now in investing in multifamily properties, for example. And that is because, with the limitation on the SALT deductions on the residential side, they think that renting is going to become more popular in high tax jurisdictions like New York. And so investing in a multifamily property could be seen as a potentially a good investment, just because there are going to be more renters in the market than there are buyers.
Right. So going back to my example from before, I'm seeing that I'm not getting the benefit of the SALT deduction anymore under the new law in New York. I individually may be more inclined to continue renting, and therefore the demand for multifamily housing in New York continues to rises or starts to rise, and therefore those are safer investments for the investors.
Sure, and we're seeing that. We're seeing that there's more interest in sort of the multifamily buildings than there
Right.
would have been prior to the tax change. So, but yeah, I mean, it definitely makes commercial real estate as a general matter more attractive. But then there are also subcategories within commercial real estate that, like multifamily buildings, that
Right.
now look even more attractive.
Okay. The other thing you and I had talked about before we started the conversation was the idea of these opportunity zones. That I'll let you explain more about kind of what they are in practice. But to me, breaking it down, it was kind of like New York City once upon a time was an opportunity zone before the gentrification and
Right.
cleaning it all up, like in the 90s and so forth. So yeah, tell us a little bit about that and what you guys are seeing on that front.
Okay, so essentially, so to your point about New York City, it once upon a time was an opportunity zone, and no longer really is. It's it's very expensive to invest in New York City
Right.
real estate, even though the time is ripe to do it. It's just a very expensive market. There are zones that have been identified in this new tax bill, which have been called "quote unquote" opportunity zones, and there are some major tax benefits to investing in these opportunity zones. So there are cities that, like, for example, New Haven and Connecticut and Bridgeport, which are ripe for development, and the Treasury Department, I believe, is supposed to come out with new regs very soon, which will give guidance to investors in terms of investing in these these opportunity zones, but there are a number of them identified in this tax bill across the country.
Okay.
It's probably one of the most progressive provisions in this tax bill, and it's going to encourage investment into sort of these tertiary markets, which actually might be a good investment proposition because you're getting, not only is it less expensive to invest in these markets, compared to a gateway city like New York or Miami,
Right.
On top of that, if this thing really takes off and you invest in the right market, it could be that you end up doing very well investing in those places, and in addition get a number of tax benefits that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
So those investments are more speculative because of the, I guess, geographic area where they're being made, and
Sure.
there's work to be done there, I guess I would describe it.
That's right, but it's a higher risk, higher reward proposition, right? I mean, in New York, you're the risk reward is going to be a little bit different. I mean, you're going to go in and you're going to know that you're probably going to do well investing in New York, but it's going to be a high investment, and then the reward is going to be sort of commensurate with that. It's not whereas here it's like it's a high risk in the sense that you're investing and you're not sure, if the city might take off, maybe it doesn't. But it's a relatively lower amount, but the rewards are much higher if if this bill does what it's supposed to do.
Right. So New York and Miami and places like that are established, I mean, you kind of know what you're getting and you're paying a premium for it because the returns are, I don't want to say guaranteed because nothing in life ever is, frankly, but you have a very good sense of what's going to come of that investment, whereas these other opportunity zones, I mean, you may hit a home run, you may strike out, but the bill's design, or the law, I suppose now, is designed in a way that encourages folks to, I guess, take the chance.
That's correct. That's exactly it.
Interesting. Very good.
So, the thing that I would recommend to potential investors at this point is evaluate sort of where you would want to invest in the U.S. and talk to a tax lawyer, a real estate lawyer, of course, too, but also somebody with tax capabilities who can tell you sort of what are the tax benefits, and then also think about how you want to structure the investment, because that's going to be important under this new law. The traditional way of structuring real estate investments may not actually be your best bet now.
Okay.
Right.
So if you're doing a new investment, we're talking about evaluating the tax implications of the new law, talking to the real estate attorney to discuss structuring options. What about the folks that have already invested and are already sort of in play, under the old regime? Can they do anything? Is there stuff that they should be asking their advisors to do on those fronts as well, or what's the deal there?
Sure. I mean, we would totally recommend that, people who already have real estate investments look at their structure and see if they can't restructure those investments to be more tax efficient under the new law. Okay. For sure. For example, what we're seeing a lot of now is that, people are investing in, they're still setting up, for example, limited liability companies to make their investments, but they're electing to be treated, electing for the limited liability company to be treated as a corporation for purposes of the tax bill, because, going back to the point earlier, corporations now have the 21%.
Right. So get those 8832s filed to check the box, as they say.
Exactly,
in the tax land,
to check the box, right? To make a check the box election.
Okay.
So, and people who are, who currently have investments in real estate, again, they should do the same thing, sort of reevaluate, the investments and the structures that they currently have in place and see what can be changed to, to maximize the tax benefits under the new rules.
Okay. So if you're already in the investment game here, all is not lost. There are opportunities to reevaluate, to restructure potentially that make the where you can take advantage, I suppose, of the benefits offered by the new law.
Yeah, that's right, and that's why we say you should come talk to a Withers person, because this is really what we do.
All right. So I think that's a good synopsis of the TCJA for our audience. With all my guests, I like to give them an opportunity to just describe a little bit about themselves and their practice. So, take this next, 90 to 120 seconds to give us the elevator pitch on a long elevator ride, if you will.
No, thanks, Joe. I mean, I appreciate it. I am a commercial real estate attorney who has been practicing in Manhattan and actually nationwide. I've done deals all over the country for, almost the past decade. I do all kinds of commercial and residential deals, but, my specialty is in commercial. I do dispositions, acquisitions, leasing, financing, joint venture agreements, anything that has to do with sort of investment into commercial real property. For the most part, I can pretty much do it, including after the deal agreements, such as development agreements and, construction agreements, et cetera.
Right. It's not just about buying the dirt. There's more to the story than that.
That's right. There's more to the story than buying the dirt. There are a number of agreements that you would enter into after you've purchased the thing. So we do it all, or most of it.
And we know who to call if it's something that we don't do.
Exactly. And if we don't do it, if it's something really specialized like zoning, or we'll know who to get.
Okay. Nothing. That all sounds great. Well, thanks again for joining me, and thanks to the audience for listening in.
Thank you.
This concludes the second episode of With Legal and Business Insights. Thanks for tuning in and listening, and special thank you to Vasiliki Yiannoulis for participating in today's episode and offering her insight. You can find links to the firm's website in this episode's show notes, as well as links to provide feedback and to contact Vasi and me. Once again, I'm your host, Joe Morales. I'll speak to you next time on With Legal and Business Insights.